I want you to picture this moment because it's something that I think every single human being has experienced, usually right after they've dropped a significant amount of money.
Okay, I'm with you.
You're at a dealership, you've spent weeks, maybe months, agonizing over reviews, safety ratings, gas mileage, all of it, and you finally pull the trigger on a car. Let's say it's a bright red Mazda hatchback.
Very specific. I like it.
It has to be specific because up until this exact moment, you were convinced deep down that this car was unique.
Yeah, you think, I've made a special choice here.
Exactly. You thought, hey, nobody drives these. I'm going to stand out in the sea of gray and black sedans. You feel distinctive, you feel special, you drive it off the lot, that new car smell is hitting you, you're feeling good.
And I think I know exactly where this is going.
Of course you do. The very next morning, you're on your commute, coffee in hand, feeling all smug in your unique red hatchback, and what do you see at the first stoplight?
Another red hatchback.
Another red hatchback. Then you merge onto the highway, and there are two more in the lane next to you. Suddenly, the parking lot at work is infested with them.
It's an outbreak.
It's like the universe opened a generic copy-paste menu and just filled your city with your specific car overnight.
It's the Grand Theft Auto effect.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you get in a certain car in that game, and suddenly the game engine spawns that car everywhere just to save memory.
That is the perfect analogy, and the immediate reaction, the gut feeling, is usually one of two things. Either, is this a glitch in the Matrix? Or,
did everyone in this town coordinate to buy this car yesterday just to mess with me?
right, it feels spooky, it feels personal, it feels like the universe is sending you a sign, or that you're losing your mind just a little bit.
And it doesn't have to be a car either. It can be anything.
Oh, for sure. Let's take a less expensive example. Say you learn a totally obscure word, something you have never, ever heard in your life, like buzkashi.
Ah, yes. The Central Asian sport played on horseback with a goat carcass.
Headless goat hockey, as I've heard it described, which is just an incredible phrase. You read about it in some niche travel blog, you chuckle, you file it away as a great piece of trivia.
And then, bam.
Bam! 2 days later, you're reading a magazine about global politics, and the author uses a metaphor about buzkashi. Then you turn on a movie that night, and there it is in the background. It's everywhere.
It's a universal human experience. It feels magical or, a little paranoid depending on your disposition. But what you are experiencing isn't a shift in reality. Reality didn't change.
The number of red cars didn't suddenly triple?
No. The number of buzkashi references didn't spike. What changed is your biological filter, your brain.
Today, we're doing a deep dive into that specific uncanny feeling. It is formally known in the psychology journals as the frequency illusion, but in one of the strangest, most bizarre twists of naming history, it is popularly known as the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon.
Which is where this topic gets really, really wild. Because we aren't just talking about cognitive science today. We are talking about how a harmless, everyday quirk of the brain got named after a notorious, violent West German far-left militant group from the 1970s.
Talk about a crossover episode nobody asked for. We have neuroscience and we have urban guerrilla warfare.
So quite the mix.
For this deep dive, we're going to unpack the cognitive wiring that makes this whole thing happen. We're going to talk about the bouncer in your brain that decides what you notice. Then, we're going to pivot hard into the history of the Red Army faction, the actual Baader-Meinhof group, to understand why that specific name got attached to this psychological effect.
It's a journey that takes us from the neurology of the brainstem, specifically a little bundle of neurons called the reticular activating system, to the political turmoil of 1970s Germany.
And then to art history and the concept of terrorist chic, of all things.
And finally, we bring it all the way back to modern decision-making pitfalls in really important fields like medicine and marketing.
And we have a massive stack of sources to get us there. We're pulling from Arnold Zwicky's original linguistics logs, some great cognitive science breakdowns from Qualia and TheraHive, historical archives from the Social History Portal on the Red Army faction, and even some film criticism regarding the movie The Baader-Meinhof Complex.
It's a heavy stack, but I think it's the only way to really connect all these seemingly random dots.
Absolutely. So let's start with the hardware. What is actually physically happening in our heads when we see that red car everywhere? Because it feels so incredibly real. It feels like the frequency actually increased.
It does feel real, and that's the trick your brain is playing on you. The frequency illusion is a classic cognitive bias. And the term itself was really solidified by a Stanford linguistics professor named Arnold Zwicky back in 2005.
Oh, that recently. I thought it would be an older term.
The phenomenon is old, but the formal name is relatively new. And I was reading through his original posts on the language log, and he wasn't even talking about cars or product names initially. He was talking about grammar.
Like when you notice people misusing a specific word. That's a pet peeve of mine.
Exactly that. He'd notice a specific grammatical error, and then suddenly he'd feel like everyone was making that same error. He'd think it was some new trend that was destroying the English language.
I have that feeling at least once a week.
We all do. But Zwicky, being a linguist, broke it down. He realized it wasn't one single process. It was two specific psychological processes that team up to fool you.
The double whammy.
It is a double whammy. The first part is selective attention. This is the mechanism where your brain completely unconsciously filters the world for what you are currently focusing on. It actively looks for the new thing.
Okay, so that's step one. What's step two?
The second part is a much more famous bias, confirmation bias.
Yeah.
That's where you actively seek out evidence that supports your new hypothesis, and you ignore everything that contradicts it.
So, to stick with our car analogy, my selective attention is now tuned to red hatchbacks, and my confirmation bias then makes me count the 3 red hatchbacks I see, but I completely ignore the 3,000 gray sedans, blue trucks, and white vans that I also pass on the same commute.
Precisely. You don't count the non-red hatchbacks. You're not running a proper statistical analysis on your drive to work. Your brain is just looking for hits, not misses. It's looking to prove itself right.
See? I told you they were everywhere.
That's the internal monologue. But to really understand how selective attention works, why you suddenly notice the red car now and you didn't yesterday, we have to go a little deeper into the brain's biology. We have to look at a specific part called the reticular activating system.
The RAS. I love this concept. In the research from Qualia, this is described as a bundle of neurons in the brainstem.
Right, it's deep down at the base of the brain. Structurally, it's an evolutionarily very old part of our wiring. It deals with the absolute basics: arousal, alertness, your sleep-wake cycles.
The really fundamental stuff.
The really fundamental stuff. But its most critical job, for our discussion anyway, is that it acts as a kind of sensory gate, a filter.
A gatekeeper.
A gatekeeper is a good way to put it. I mean, think about it. At any given second, right now as you're listening to us, your senses are being bombarded. There's the hum of the refrigerator in your kitchen, the pressure of your socks on your feet, the visual clutter of the room you're in, the faint smell of coffee, the sound of traffic outside.
I wasn't noticing any of that until you said it.
Exactly. Because if your conscious brain, your cerebral cortex, had to process 100% of that data simultaneously, you'd short circuit. You literally couldn't function.
So the RAS is the bouncer at the club of my consciousness.
That is the perfect analogy. The RAS is the guy with the clipboard and the velvet rope standing outside a very exclusive club. It decides what sensory information gets through to the VIP section, which is your conscious attention.
And most things get turned away at the door.
Most things get turned away. They remain background noise. You don't hear the fridge until it suddenly stops humming, right? That change is what gets your attention.
Right. It's there, but I'm not actively attending to it.
But the RAS has a VIP list. It has a list of things that are automatically allowed to bypass the filter and grab your attention no matter what.
Okay, so how do you get on the VIP list for my brain?
Well, the default settings are all about survival. Sudden loud noises, your own name, signs of danger like a snake or a spider. Things that were important for our ancestors to notice immediately.
Primal stuff.
Very primal stuff.
Uh-huh.
But also, and this is the absolute key for the frequency illusion, the RAS prioritizes novelty and relevance.
Okay, novelty and relevance.
When you buy that red car, or when you learn that new word buzkashi, you are essentially sending a memo down to your RAS. You're updating the VIP list.
You're telling the bouncer, hey, this red car is important to me now. It's relevant. Let it in.
That's it, exactly. So before you bought the car, the thousands of red hatchbacks driving past you were just part of the general traffic noise. The bouncer was kicking them to the curb. Not on the list, buddy. Keep moving.
But now I buy the car, I update the list, and the bouncer sees one coming and says, right this way, sir. Your table is waiting.
Yes, the stimulus hasn't changed. The frequency of red cars on the road is statistically identical to yesterday. But your filter has changed. The signal is now getting through the noise.
This reminds me of that classic example, the cocktail party effect.
Oh, that's the canonical demonstration of the RAS at work. It's a perfect illustration.
Right, so you're at a loud bar or a party. The music is thumping, dozens of conversations are happening all around you. It's just a wall of sound. You can't distinguish any specific words from the table next to you.
Your RAS is actively suppressing all that noise so you can focus on the person you're trying to talk to. It's doing its job.
But then someone, all the way across the room, maybe in a totally different conversation, just happens to say your name.
And you snap to it instantly. Your head whips around.
Did someone call me? Now, how on earth did you hear that? You weren't consciously listening to their conversation at all.
But your RAS was.
It was monitoring it.
It was monitoring the entire auditory field the whole time, like a submarine sonar, just pinging for matches against the VIP list. It only pushed the signal through to your consciousness when it got a high priority, hit your name.
So the frequency illusion is just that exact mechanism, but applied to a new word or a new object you've just encountered.
That's all it is. It's your brain's filtering system updating its priorities in real time.
Now, the linguist Zwicky also mentioned something called the recency illusion. How is that different? Because they sound very, very similar. They seem to overlap.
They're cousins, and they often work together to amplify the effect. The recency illusion is the belief that because you have noticed something only recently, the thing itself must be recent.
Okay, so this is the kids these days syndrome, like when an older person complains about a new slang word that's ruining the language.
But then you look it up and find out that Shakespeare or Chaucer used it.
Exactly. Or a fashion trend comes back and people think it's brand new. You assume it's a new phenomenon simply because it's new to your personal experience.
Precisely. So when you combine the recency illusion, this is a brand new thing, with the frequency illusion, and now this brand new thing is everywhere, you get this really powerful but false sense that something is exploding in popularity right this very second.
When in reality, it's just been chugging along the whole time and you've only just noticed.
Usually, yes. It's business as usual for the world, but a grand opening for your attention.
So that's the brain mechanics. It's not magic, it's biology. It's a filter update. But now we have to address the elephant in the room, or I guess the urban gorillas in the room.
Right.
Why on earth do we call this the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon? Where did that name come from?
It is, without a doubt, one of the most bizarre naming conventions in popular psychology. Usually, scientific phenomena are named after the researcher who discovered them, like the Doppler effect or the Coriolis effect.
Or maybe a famous patient, like Lou Gehrig's disease.
Exactly. This one is named after a crowdsourced anecdote from a newspaper forum in the mid-90s.
It really goes back to 1994, right? To a specific newspaper.
It does. We have to transport ourselves back to the pre-social media era, 1994. The internet exists, but it's not what it is today. Local newspapers were still a huge deal. And there was a paper called the St. Paul Pioneer Press in Minnesota.
And they had a column that was kind of a precursor to a modern subreddit.
That's a great way to put it. The column was called Bulletin Board, and it was basically a slow-motion analog Reddit thread. People would write in or call in with weird stories, observations, little life anecdotes, and the columnists would curate them and publish them.
And one of the regular contributors was a guy named Terry Mullen.
Right. Though he was writing under a pseudonym, Ghetto on Lincoln. And one day in '94, Terry had a weird experience. He was talking to a friend about the Red Army faction, the West German terrorist group, also known as the Baader-Meinhof group.
Now, let's just pause on that. In 1994, in Minnesota, was this a topical conversation to be having?
Not at all. And that's the entire point. The group's peak of activity was the 1970s. By 1994, they were largely inactive, though they hadn't officially dissolved yet. It was a random, obscure historical reference. Maybe they were talking about 70s history or European politics. Definitely wasn't front-page news.
So it was a true out-of-the-blue reference. And then what happened?
The very next day, Terry Mullen opens the newspaper, probably the Pioneer Press itself, and there it is, a reference to the Baader-Meinhof group.
The classic double take, the wait what moment.
He was completely struck by what he called the eerie coincidence of it. So he did what any good bulletin board contributor would do. He wrote in about it. He described the experience of hearing an obscure name and then immediately seeing it again, and he gave it a name. He dubbed it the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon.
And it went viral, or as viral as things could go in print media in 1994.
It did, in its own way. Other readers started writing in saying, yes, that happens to me all the time. I learned the word perspicacious and then I saw it 3 times the next day. The name just stuck. It had a ring to it.
It's more memorable than the frequency illusion, I'll give it that.
It's way catchier. And from that newspaper column, it migrated to the early internet forums and Usenet groups, and eventually it just became part of the cultural lexicon.
So just to be absolutely crystal clear for everyone listening, The phenomenon is named after the terrorist group, not because the group causes it or because they use some kind of subliminal messaging,
No, nothing like that.
but simply because the name itself was the subject of a frequency illusion for one guy in St. Paul, Minnesota in 1994.
That is correct. It is a complete and total accident of history.
Mhm.
If Terry Mullen had been talking about Buzkashi with his friend that day, we'd probably be sitting here calling this the Buzkashi phenomenon.
That is just wild. But it gives us the perfect excuse to pivot. Because if we're going to use the term Baader-Meinhof phenomenon, we really should take the time to understand who Baader and Meinhof actually were.
I agree.
This wasn't just a band with a catchy name. This was a group that shook the foundations of the post-war German state.
Absolutely. And I think for a lot of modern listeners, especially those outside of Germany, the name Baader-Meinhof is just a label. It's abstract.
Yeah.
But the reality of the Rote Army fraction, the Red Army faction, is a deep, dark, and very complex chapter of history.
And to understand them, you have to understand the pressure cooker that was West Germany in the late 1960s.
You really do. We're talking about the Auschwitz generation conflict, right? I was reading the social history portal source, and the generational rage was just palpable.
Can you unpack that a bit? What does that term mean?
Well, you have to imagine being a 20-year-old student in West Germany in 1967. The war has been over for 22 years. The economic miracle, the Wirtschaftswunder, has rebuilt the country into a prosperous democracy. But you look up at the people in charge, your parents, your professors, the judges, the government leaders, and you see former Nazis.
And this wasn't just teenage rebellion paranoia. This was documented fact.
No, they weren't wrong. High-ranking judges, politicians, police chiefs, captains of industry, many had served in the SS or the Nazi Party and had, seamlessly integrated into the new West German democracy without ever really facing consequences.
So the younger generation felt this was a massive
That's
hypocrisy.
an immense moral revulsion. They felt that the whole denazification process after the war had been a sham. They famously asked their parents, "What did you do during the war?"
Yeah.
And were met with silence or deflection. They saw a direct line from the fascism of the Third Reich to the capitalist state they were living in.
And this internal German anger was happening at the same time as the global anti-Vietnam War movement.
Correct. So you have this internal fire, and then you have this external fuel. They saw the U.S. war in Vietnam as another form of imperialism, of fascism even, and the West German government was a key ally of the U.S. The whole thing was a tinderbox. And that tinderbox really ignited on June 2nd, 1967.
The visit of the Shah of Iran to Berlin.
Yes, the Shah was visiting West Berlin. He was seen by the left as a brutal CIA-installed dictator. So naturally, students organized a massive protest against his visit.
And the response was violent.
Extremely violent. The police and also a group of pro-Shah supporters who were bussed in just attacked the protesters with clubs. It was chaos. And in the middle of all this, a student named Benno Onesorg was shot in the back of the head and killed by a plainclothes police officer named Karl-Heinz Kurras.
And Onesorg wasn't even a radical leader, was he? He was just there.
He was unarmed. It was his first ever protest. He was basically just an observer. He was killed essentially execution style. And that moment radicalized an entire generation of the German left.
It was the point of no return.
For many, yes. It was the George Floyd moment of 1967 Germany, if you want a modern parallel. A moment of state brutality, caught on camera, that sparked an absolute explosion. Gudrun Ensslin, who had become one of the leaders of the RAF, famously shouted at a student meeting that night, "This is the Auschwitz generation. You can't argue with people who made Auschwitz. They have weapons and we haven't. We must arm ourselves."
That's a chilling quote. It's the logic of escalation right there.
It is. It's the moment protest starts to curdle into something else.
So let's talk about the key players. We have Baader-Meinhof, but as we said, that name was actually a media creation, right? The press needed a shorthand.
Right. They always called themselves the RAF Rote Army Fraction, Red Army Faction.
Yeah.
They saw themselves as an urban guerrilla army in the tradition of South American groups like the Tupamaros. But the press latched onto the two most visible and frankly most interesting figures. First, Andreas Baader.
The action man. The delinquent.
That's a good description. He was a high school dropout, a petty criminal, obsessed with fast cars and guns. He was incredibly charismatic, impulsive, and completely focused on action over theory. He was the cool revolutionary in the leather jacket.
And it was the sizzle. And then you have Ulrich Meinhof. She was very, very different.
Completely different, a total contrast. She was one of West Germany's most famous and respected left-wing journalists. She wrote for a magazine called Konkret. She was older than the others, a mother of two twin girls, a public intellectual.
She was the stake, the ideological core.
She was the voice, She wrote the manifestos, like the urban guerrilla concept. Her decision to go underground and join the group was a massive shock to the German public. It was like if a famous op-ed columnist for a major newspaper today suddenly went underground to rob banks. It was unthinkable.
And the third pillar of this early group, often left out of the popular name, was Gudrun Ensslin.
And you really can't understand the RAF without understanding Ensslin. She was the ideological spine. She was Baader's girlfriend. But in many ways, she was the real driving force behind the group's militancy. She was the daughter of a Protestant pastor, highly intelligent and absolutely frighteningly uncompromising in her beliefs.
So you have the action, the voice, and the ideology. How do they go from student protests and theory to actual terrorism? Because that's a huge leap.
It was a gradual but deliberate escalation. It started with what they called propaganda of the deed. The first major act was in 1968 when Baader, Ensslin, and two others set fire to two department stores in Frankfurt.
Why department stores?
It was a symbolic act against capitalism and what they saw as public indifference to the Vietnam War. They set the bombs to go off at night so no one would be killed. The idea was to bring the Vietnam War home, to shake people out of their consumerist complacency.
But then they were caught and jailed for that.
They were. But Baader was later broken out of custody in a dramatic shootout in 1970 with the help of Baader-Meinhof. That was the moment Meinhof crossed the line and went underground. And that's considered the official birth of the Red Army faction.
And once they were underground, the violence escalated quickly.
Very quickly. They needed money, so they started robbing banks. This inevitably led to shootouts with the police. Then they went to Jordan to train with Palestinian militant groups like Fatah to learn how to be urban guerrillas.
So they came back to Germany as a trained fighting force.
In their minds, yes. They came back and launched their first major offensive in May 1972. They bombed U.S. military bases in Frankfurt and Heidelberg, and they bombed police stations and a judge's car. People died. American soldiers were killed. The war was on.
And this all built to a climax in the German autumn of 1977. Reading the timeline of those weeks, it's just relentless. It seems like it was straight out of a political thriller movie.
The German autumn was the absolute peak of the violence and the crisis. By this time, the original leaders, Baader, Ensslin, and others, were all in the high-security Stammheim prison. Meinhof had already died in her cell in 1976, ruled a suicide. So the second generation of the RAF was on the outside, and their sole goal was to force the government to release their comrades.
So they launched a coordinated offensive.
An incredibly audacious one. First, in April, they assassinated the Attorney General, Siegfried Buback. Then in September, they kidnapped Hans-Martin Schleyer.
And Schleyer was a very symbolic target.
He was the perfect target for them. On the one hand, he was the president of the German Employers Association, basically the face of German capitalism. But more importantly, from their perspective, he was a former high-ranking SS officer. He represented that unrepentant Nazi past they were fighting against.
Did they ambush his convoy?
Killed his driver and 3 bodyguards in a hail of gunfire and held him hostage for weeks, demanding the release of the prisoners.
And the German government, under Chancellor Helmut Schmidt, refused to negotiate.
They adopted a hard line. No deals with terrorists. So the RAF escalated again. In a coordinated move, a Palestinian group allied with them, the PFLP, hijacked a Lufthansa flight, the Landshut, which was flying from Mallorca to Frankfurt.
So now you have an international hostage crisis on top of the domestic one.
Exactly. They diverted the plane all over the Middle East and finally to Mogadishu, Somalia. They repeated the demand. Release the RAF prisoners in Stammheim or they would kill all the passengers.
The stakes were incredibly high. The whole world was watching.
It all came to a head in a very violent and dramatic few days. On October 18, 1977, elite West German Special Forces, the GSG-9, stormed the plane on the tarmac in Mogadishu and freed all the hostages. It was a massive victory for the state.
And that news reached the prisoners in Stammheim.
It did. That very night, a night that has gone down in German history as the Stammheim death night news of the failed hijacking reached the prisoners.
And Baader, Ensslin, and another member, Jan Karl Raspe, were found dead in their cells the next morning.
Correct. The official ruling was coordinated suicide. Baader was shot. Ensslin was hanged from the bars of her cell window. Raspe was shot. The official narrative is that when they realized the hijacking had failed and there was no hope of being released, they entered a suicide pact using weapons that had been smuggled into the prison by their lawyers over many months.
There's always a however with this story.
There is. For decades, supporters and sympathizers have maintained that they were murdered by the state, that it was an extrajudicial killing. Even today, There are still questions and debates about how the guns got in or the specific mechanics of the deaths.
But officially it was suicide. And what happened to the hostage, Schleier?
Once the kidnappers on the outside heard the news from Stamheim, they executed Hans Martin Schleyer and left his body in the trunk of a car in France. It was the brutal, bloody end of the German autumn.
It's a staggering history. And it's fascinating that this group, which was so focused on dense Marxist-Leninist ideology, has this massive visual legacy. I mean, even the name Baader-Meinhof conjures up these specific black and white images for people who know the history. The police wanted posters, the sunglasses, the leather jackets.
That visual element is absolutely crucial. And there was a fascinating article I read in the AG Graduate Journal about the visual turns in how the RAF is remembered. For a long time after the 70s, there was this deliberate visual amnesia in Germany.
Visual amnesia. That sounds like the polar opposite of the frequency illusion.
In a way, it is. It's a refusal to see. The state and the mainstream media didn't want to engage too deeply with the images of the terrorists because they were afraid of glorifying them or making them seem cool.
They wanted to control the narrative.
Completely. The images were just evidence, nothing more. They were mugshots of criminals. But in 1988, the world-famous artist Gerhard Richter broke that taboo.
This is his famous cycle of paintings, 18 October 1977.
Exactly. Richter took those iconic, grainy, black and white police and press photos, the photos of the dead bodies in the cells, a picture of a young Ulrich Meinhof, the funeral procession, and he painted them. But he used his signature blur technique. They look like out-of-focus photographs.
Why the blur, though? What's the point of taking a historical photo and just making it fuzzy?
The blur is the genius of it. The blur does a few things. First, it puts a critical distance between the viewer and the raw, often brutal subject matter. It makes the image slippery, uncertain. It suggests that we can't really know the full truth of that night, or that our memory of the event is fading and unreliable.
So it's a comment on memory itself.
It is. And it also reframed the images. They stopped being just evidence of state power or terrorist propaganda, and they became images of grief. It allowed a generation of Germans to finally mourn the whole tragedy of it all, the waste of life, the failed ideology, the violence on all sides, without necessarily endorsing the terrorists.
It turned them from monsters or heroes into ghosts.
That's a perfect word for it. They became ghosts of a difficult past. But then, as time moves on, you swing to the late 90s and early 2000s, and you get a completely different phenomenon that critics cynically called Baader-Meinhof.
Baader-Meinhof. That is incredibly cynical, but I think I know what it means.
It is, but it captures something real that was happening. The RAF officially dissolved in 1998 with a final letter. And almost immediately after the real threat was gone, the symbols, the RAF logo with the MT-5 submachine gun against the Red Star, started appearing on T-shirts and in fashion.
Terrorist chic.
Basically, yes. You had fashion magazines running these high-concept spreads that would, for example, recreate the photo of Schleier's kidnapping, but with beautiful models in designer clothes in the trunk of the car.
That's in pretty poor taste.
It was the complete emptying of historical meaning and suffering for an aesthetic. The danger was gone, so now it's just a retro-cool vibe. The selective attention of the public, or at least a part of the culture, shifted from fear to fashion.
And this tension between authentic history and this cool aesthetic really seems to climax with the 2008 film The Baader-Meinhof Complex.
It really does. That film, which was based on a massive nonfiction book by Stefan Ost, tried to do the impossible. It tried to be a meticulously accurate historical document and a thrilling action movie at the same time.
I've seen clips of it. It's incredibly intense. It's basically a Michael Mann-style action blockbuster.
It is, and that was both its strength and the source of major criticism. It was praised for its authenticity. They recreated the scenes, the clothes, the cars, exactly as they looked in the news photos. But it was heavily criticized, including by the families of the victims, for casting these very young, very attractive German movie stars and making the terrorists look, oh, cool.
It's the central paradox, isn't it? To explain why this group had such an appeal to young people at the time, you have to show their charisma, their energy, their style.
Exactly. If you just portray them as one-dimensional, scowling monsters from the beginning, you don't understand why, at one point, polls showed that something like 25% of young Germans expressed some level of sympathy for them. You have to show the allure to understand the tragedy of their path.
But in doing so, you risk reactivating that cool factor for a new generation that doesn't have the historical context of the violence.
And that was the debate that raged around the film. It's a real tightrope walk.
So we've gone from a guy in St. Paul, Minnesota, noticing a coincidence in his morning paper, all the way to the bloody history of German urban guerrilla warfare, and then to art history and the ethics of fashion. This is the ultimate unpacking of a simple term.
It really shows how a single phrase can be a thread that you pull, and it unravels this huge, complicated tapestry of history and psychology. But I want to circle back to the frequency illusion itself,
Right.
because while noticing a German terrorist group's name is an interesting cocktail party anecdote, this cognitive bias has real-world teeth. It's not just about red cars and trivia.
It actually affects how we make critical, sometimes life and death decisions.
It absolutely does. And a perfect and slightly scary example is in the field of medicine.
The COVID toes example.
Right. Let's think back to the spring of 2020. Everyone is terrified. Everyone is hypervigilant about the virus. Doctors are scanning every single patient for any possible sign of COVID-19. It is the red car of the medical world at that moment.
It's the only thing on the RAS priority list.
Exactly. And suddenly, dermatologists and other physicians started reporting a strange phenomenon. Patients, often younger ones, with chilblain-like discoloration on their toes, red or purple lesions.
And because COVID was the red car on everyone's mind, they immediately assumed it must be a symptom of COVID.
Precisely. It was quickly dubbed COVID toes in the media. Now, if a patient had walked into a clinic with the exact same toe discoloration in 2018, the doctor might have looked for other causes, lifestyle factors, cold weather exposure, autoimmune issues. But in 2020, the RAS shouts COVID.
But later research cast some doubt on that direct link, didn't it?
It did. Later studies showed that the actual incidence rate of chilblains hadn't necessarily skyrocketed due to the virus itself in the way they first thought. What had skyrocketed was the attention being paid to people's feet and any weird symptom.
So the frequency of doctors noticing it changed, not necessarily the frequency of the condition itself.
That's a big part of it. The increased awareness skewed the perception of frequency. There's also this related idea in decision-making theory mentioned in the sources called the mongoose phenomenon.
The mongoose phenomenon? What is that?
It's a challenge to that old medical saying, when you hear hoofbeats, think of horses, not zebras, which means look for common diagnoses, not rare ones. The mongoose phenomenon suggests that if you've been primed to look for the mongoose, the rare exotic disease, you might start overdiagnosing it.
So if I'm a young doctor and I just read a fascinating journal article about a rare tropical disease,
You might, for the next few weeks, start seeing that rare disease in patients who actually just have the common flu. You discount the common causes because you're actively hunting for the rare bird you just learned about.
your RES is set to rare tropical disease, so it filters out the boring common diagnosis that's probably correct.
It can happen. It shows how increased awareness, which is usually a good thing, can sometimes skew professional judgment if you're not careful.
And it happens in marketing constantly. I mean, advertisers basically weaponize the frequency illusion against us.
Oh, it's the foundation of modern advertising. Think about retargeting. You look at a pair of boots on a website one time, and for the next month, those exact boots follow you around the internet.
They're on every website, every social media feed. It's creepy.
It is creepy, but it's effective. That's the digital version. But even traditional advertising uses this. They'll launch a product with a big ad campaign. That's the priming. That's what gets it on your RS's radar. Then they place billboards, TV ads, influencer posts.
So because your brain is now flagged that product as new and relevant, you start seeing it everywhere.
And you think, wow, everyone is buying these boots. This product is really popular. It creates a false sense of consensus.
Everyone is doing it, so I should too.
Exactly. It triggers the psychological principle of conformity. You buy the boots because you don't want to be left out of a trend that might, in reality, only exist in your head, or rather in your newly tuned RES filters.
It even affects how we perceive the entire economy. I was reading about this concept of inflation perception.
Yes, this is a perfect example of frequency bias in economics. Think about the things you buy frequently. Milk, bread, eggs, gas.
The weekly purchases.
Right. And then think about the things you buy very rarely. A new refrigerator, a television, a car. Now, if the price of eggs goes up by 25 cents, you notice it every single week. The frequency of that price pain is very high.
It's a constant reminder.
It is. But if the price of a big screen TV drops by 20%, you don't notice it because you aren't in the market for a TV every week. That price change is invisible to you.
So even if the official overall inflation rate is low because electronics and durable goods are getting cheaper, we feel like inflation is out of control because a gallon of milk costs more.
That's it, exactly. The frequently purchased goods completely dominate our perception of the economy. Our brain weights the frequency of the purchase more than the magnitude of the price change. It's why people are often so pessimistic about the economy, even when the data says things are generally okay.
Hmm.
Their RAS is tuned to the gas pump, not the Best Buy catalog.
It's really making me realize how deeply subjective our reality is. We all think we're observing the world objectively, but we're really just seeing the edited highlights that our brain lets us see.
That is the fundamental takeaway from all of this. We are, at our core, pattern-seeking animals. And once our brain thinks it has spotted a new pattern, it will do everything in its power to find confirmation for it.
So how do we navigate this? I mean, on one hand, sometimes a coincidence is just a coincidence, but on the other hand, it can feel like something more, can feel like synchronicity.
Synchronicity is the term the psychologist Carl Jung used for this. Meaningful coincidences. And look, it's a very powerful human tendency to find meaning and patterns in the world. If you're thinking that an old friend you haven't seen in 10 years and they call you on the phone 5 minutes later,
It's really hard not to feel like that's magic, or telepathy, or a sign from the universe.
it is. It feels profound. But the skeptic and the statistician would ask a simple question. How many thousands of times did you think of a friend and they didn't call you 5 minutes later?
Right? Countless times.
And how many times did a friend call you when you weren't thinking about them at all?
Also countless, we just don't notice those.
We ignore the misses. We only remember the one dramatic hit. The frequency illusion provides a perfectly rational biological explanation for that spooky feeling without needing to invoke any supernatural intervention.
But, and here's the cool part I took from the sources, you can actually hack this system. You can use the frequency illusion for good.
Yes, you can turn it into a tool. I saw this in the source from TheraHive regarding DBT skills. That's dialectical behavior therapy.
A type of therapy that teaches emotional regulation skills.
Right. DBT is all about learning practical skills. One of the skills might be validation, learning how to validate someone else's feelings, or mindfulness. When you are first learning these skills in therapy, you can intentionally prime your RAS. You tell yourself in the morning, okay, today I am going to actively look for opportunities to validate someone.
And because you've consciously set that filter, suddenly you see opportunities everywhere that you would have completely missed the day before.
That's it. You're weaponizing your selective attention for personal growth. By reviewing a new concept or a new skill frequently, you keep it on the VIP list of your RAS. You turn the illusion into a powerful learning tool. You literally change your reality by changing what you're looking for.
That's a really proactive way to use it. But what about defending against the downsides? The potential for medical misdiagnosis or falling for those marketing tricks?
The first and best defense is simply awareness. Just knowing that the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon exists is half the battle. So when you have that thought, wow, everyone is wearing those yellow hats all of a sudden, you can pause for a second.
And you can ask the critical question.
You can ask, is everyone really wearing them? Or did I just see an ad for one and now my brain is pointing them all out to me?
And this is where we need to talk about checking the base rate.
Yes, the base rate is the ultimate antidote to the illusion. The base rate is simply the answer to the question, how often does this thing happen normally in the general population?
So going back to the case of the COVID toes,
You'd have to ask, what was the base rate of chilblains in the population in 2019 before the pandemic? If the base rate was, say, 0.1% and now you're seeing a rate of 0.12%, well, there's no epidemic of toe problems. You just start looking at feet more often.
which frankly is a weird hobby, but I get your point. We ignore the denominator. We only see the numerator.
We completely ignore the denominator. We focus on the handful of hits that confirm our new belief, and we forget about the massive ocean of data that shows it's nothing special. If you can just stop and ask, did the frequency of the thing actually change? Or did my attention to the thing change? You break the spell.
It's about engaging that critical thinking circuit in your prefrontal cortex and overriding the automatic pattern matching of the older parts of your brain.
Precisely. We have to be smarter than our own brainstem sometimes.
So, to bring it all back home, we have traveled from the neurons in our brainstem to a guy reading a newspaper in St. Paul in 1994, to the explosive and tragic history of the Red Army faction in Germany, and finally to how this quirky bias shapes our modern lives in medicine and marketing.
It's a powerful reminder that our perception of the world is a construct. It is filtered, it is edited, and it is curated by our own biology. We don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are, or perhaps as our RAS allows us to see it.
It's a humbling thought, and a really fascinating one. It makes you wonder what's out there.
What else is right in front of our faces that we're simply not seeing?
Mm.
Because we haven't learned the name for it yet.
Well, I have a feeling our listeners are going to be seeing a lot of things differently after this deep dive. And I have one final thought, or maybe a challenge for everyone listening.
Oh, what's that?
We've just spent the last hour talking about the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon and the Red Army faction. We have primed you. We have spent an hour carefully placing this on your RAS VIP list.
Oh, no. I see what you're doing. This is a bit of an experiment.
It is. So here is my prediction. Sometime in the next 24 to 48 hours, you will see a reference to the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon, or the Red Army faction, or maybe, just for good measure, a bright red hatchback.
It's inevitable, Nat.
It's going to pop up in a news feed or a different podcast or a random conversation. It will happen. And when it does,
Don't panic.
don't panic.
Yeah.
It's not a glitch in the matrix. It's not a conspiracy. It's not a sign. It's just your brain finally paying attention.
Enjoy the illusion.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll catch you on the next one.